No one claimed the bride because she's old, until the mountain man little girl pointed, "That's her, that's my mama." The winter train screamed across the plains like a wounded beast, its smoke curling into the bruised evening sky. When it finally screeched to a stop at the small wind-beaten platform of Silver Creek Station, silence fell, the kind of silence that carried both hope and dread. A row of nervous women stepped down onto the snow-dusted platform, clutching carpet bags and trembling dreams. Each one had been promised a husband, a new beginning somewhere beyond the loneliness of their former lives. And among them was Eleanor Grace. She stepped carefully onto the platform, boots crunching the frost, her gloved hands tightening around the handle of her worn suitcase. Her breath clouded before her as she lifted her eyes to the crowd of waiting men, rough ranchers, miners, farmers, each scanning faces, calling out names, claiming brides like men reclaiming lost parcels. But no one called hers. She stood quietly aside, her heart thudding with every passing minute. Around her, laughter filled the air as couples met for the first time. Some men blushed and tipped their hats, others pulled shy women into awkward embraces. The station bloomed with hope. Hope except where she stood. Eleanor smoothed her plain gray skirt, the same one she had worn since St. Louis. Her dark hair, streaked gently with silver, was pinned neatly beneath her bonnet. Her face was kind, lined with soft traces of time, the kind that spoke of life lived honestly, not lavishly. She had been promised. Letters, long and thoughtful, had passed between her and a rancher named Silas Boone for nearly half a year. He'd written about his land, his cattle, his loneliness, and how he longed for a woman who could keep a home and carry conversation. Not a girl, but a woman of sense. She had believed him. The matchmaker, Mrs. Hester Klein, bustled toward her now, cheeks flushed from cold and embarrassment. "Mrs. Grace, or pardon, Miss Grace," she corrected quickly, "it seems there's been a mix-up. Mr. Boone hasn't come." Eleanor blinked, her voice low and steady. "He was certain in his last letter. Said he'd be waiting here when the 6 o'clock train arrived." Hester wrung her gloved hands. "Men change their minds, dear. Especially when they see the other brides." The words stung. Eleanor swallowed them down with dignity. She turned her gaze toward the others, young girls with flushed cheeks and ribboned bonnets, laughing nervously with their new husbands. Hope fluttered around them like the snowflakes that began to fall. No one looked at her. The wind picked up, biting through her shawl, whipping her skirts. The train whistle blew once more, a shrill reminder that she could still go back. But to what? To the small room she had rented above the dress shop? To the long empty nights where silence echoed louder than any voice? No. There was nothing for her back east. She lifted her chin, squared her shoulders and stood still, waiting though she no longer knew for what. The crowd began to thin. The young couples climbed into wagons, heading out toward the scattered ranches and homesteads beyond town. The matchmaker offered Eleanor a sympathetic look before hurrying off, her shawl flapping in the cold. When the platform was nearly empty, Eleanor was the only one left standing. A stray dog trotted by, tail low. The snow deepened. The lamplighter moved down the street, his torch flickering in the twilight. The town of Silver Creek seemed to hold its breath, and so did she. Then, the sound of hoofs. Slow, steady, and powerful like the heartbeat of the earth itself. She turned, clutching her suitcase as a large, dark horse emerged from the falling snow. The rider was a tall man with a thick beard, his coat heavy with mountain dust. His eyes were shadowed beneath his hat brim, eyes that had seen too much wilderness, too much loss. Behind him, riding in front of the saddle, was a small girl, maybe 6 years old, bundled in a wool cloak, her golden hair peeking out from beneath a fur hood. They stopped at the edge of the platform. The man dismounted with practiced ease, boots crunching into the snow. He didn't look at Eleanor at first, he was focused on the child. He lifted her gently down and brushed a stray curl from her face. "Stay close, Lydia," he murmured, voice low and gravel deep. The girl nodded, her big blue eyes darting around, until they landed on Eleanor. For a long moment the world went still. The child stared, her tiny hand clutching the hem of her father's coat. Then, with sudden certainty, she stepped forward, pointing with her mittened hand. Her voice was soft, but clear enough for the whole world to hear. "That's her, that's my mama." Eleanor froze. The man's head snapped up. His gaze met hers, cold, startled, then confused. He knelt beside the child. "Lydia," he began carefully, "that ain't?" But the little girl wouldn't listen. She ran to Eleanor, wrapping her small arms around her skirt with a familiarity that stole Eleanor's breath away. Eleanor's hand trembled as it hovered above the girl's golden hair. Something in her chest cracked open, a wound she hadn't known was still bleeding. The man finally stepped forward, removing his hat. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. My girl, she lost her mother last winter. She don't quite understand." Eleanor knelt slowly, meeting the child's eyes. "It's all right," she whispered. "I don't mind." The man looked at her, then really looked. His eyes softened, the roughness of his face somehow gentled by the sight of his daughter clutching this stranger. For a moment, none of them spoke. The snow fell quietly around them, settling on coats and hair, on the train tracks that stretched endlessly toward the mountains. And for the first time since she'd stepped off that train, Eleanor Grace didn't feel alone. She didn't know this man or his little girl. But in that instant, when the child called her mama, something inside her shifted like a door creaking open in her heart. She didn't know it yet, but fate had claimed her after all. Not with ink and paper. Not with a promise broken. But with a little girl's trembling voice and a mountain man's startled eyes. The snow kept falling long after the train disappeared into the horizon. The station lamps flickered against the white dusk, and Eleanor still knelt beside the little girl, Lydia, who clung to her as if afraid she might vanish if she let go. The mountain man, Caleb Thorne, stood nearby, hat in hand, his broad shoulders dusted in snow. His silence was thick like the cold. He cleared his throat softly, unsure how to pry his daughter's fingers from this stranger's dress. "Come now, Lydia," he said gently. "The lady's cold." But Lydia shook her head, clutching Eleanor tighter. "Don't make her go, Papa. I know it's her." Eleanor met his eyes. They were deep, weathered, the color of ironwood, eyes that had known loss and still carried it like a scar. "It's all right," she said quietly. "She just misses her mother." Caleb gave a slow nod. His voice was low, careful. "You've a kind heart, ma'am. Not many would say that after being grabbed by a strange child." A faint smile touched her lips. "I've been lonely a long time, Mr. Thorne. A little kindness doesn't frighten me." He tilted his head slightly as though studying her for the first time, not the plain gray dress, not the streaks of silver in her hair, but her. The way she spoke softly yet with dignity, like someone who had weathered storms and still stood steady. The snow grew heavier. Hester Klein had long gone. The street emptied except for the three of them. Caleb shifted his weight, clearly uneasy. "Where are you staying, ma'am?" Eleanor hesitated. The truth cut colder than the wind. "I haven't anywhere yet. My intended didn't come." Caleb's jaw tightened. He looked past her to the empty street, to the abandoned platform, to the single suitcase at her feet. "Then you'll freeze if you stay here." She tried to smile. "I'll find the boarding house." He shook his head. "Ain't safe tonight. Storm's coming down hard. My cabin's 5 miles north, up in the pines. You're welcome to ride with us until the weather breaks." Eleanor blinked, startled. "You don't even know me." He met her gaze squarely. "I know you're cold, and I know my little girl's holding on to you like the good Lord sent you. That's enough for me." So it was decided. Caleb lifted her suitcase onto his horse. Then, with surprising gentleness, he helped her mount behind him. Lydia sat snugly between them, her tiny hands resting over Eleanor's gloved ones. As the horse trudged through the snow, Eleanor listened to the steady rhythm of hooves, the whisper of wind through pines. The warmth of Caleb's back against her hands was strange, grounding. No words were spoken for a long time. The world around them turned silver and quiet. She thought of all she'd left behind, the city, the letters, the hopes she'd packed into a single suitcase. And now here she was, riding through the wilderness with a man whose name she'd only just learned, and a child who had called her mama. It felt impossible. And yet, somehow, right? They reached the foothills by nightfall. The last light faded behind the ridges, and smoke rose from a distant chimney. The cabin appeared like a shadow in the trees, rough-hewn logs, a porch half buried in snow, a flickering glow from the window. Caleb swung down first and helped Lydia off, then turned to Eleanor. His large hand reached for hers, strong and steady, calloused from years of mountain life. When she stepped inside, the warmth struck her, wood smoke, pine sap, and something sweet she couldn't name. The cabin was simple but sturdy. A fire roared in the hearth. Animal pelts hung on the walls, and a pot simmered over the flames, filling the air with the scent of stew. Lydia ran to the table and began setting out wooden bowls. Eleanor stood still, taking it all in, the safety, the silence, the unexpected welcome. Caleb noticed her hesitation. "Ain't much," he said quietly, "but it's warm. You can take my wife's room, if that don't trouble you none." She turned sharply. Your wife's. He nodded, removing his coat. His expression softened, though grief flickered in his eyes. She passed near a year ago. Fever took her before the thaw. Eleanor lowered her gaze. I'm sorry. He gave a faint shrug. The mountains take what they please. Dinner was quiet but not unpleasant. Lydia chattered between spoonfuls of stew, her stories tumbling over one another. Eleanor listened, smiling, answering softly. Caleb mostly watched, both of them, the woman his daughter clung to and the strange warmth returning to his home. After supper, Eleanor insisted on washing the dishes, though Caleb tried to stop her. You're a guest, he said. I'm a woman with two hands, she replied, rolling up her sleeves. Let me use them. He didn't argue after that. When the last plate was set aside, Lydia crawled into her father's lap, eyelids drooping. He rocked her gently before carrying her to bed. Eleanor stood near the fire, rubbing her hands for warmth, her eyes drawn to a small frame drawing on the mantel, a rough sketch of a woman holding a child. Caleb's late wife, she realized. The woman Lydia had mistaken her for. Her heart ached, not from jealousy but from tenderness. From the unspoken loneliness that filled the cabin like old music. When Caleb returned, she turned to him softly. Your daughter's heart is full of love, Mr. Thorne. She must have had a good mother. He looked at the fire. She did. The best. Then after a pause, but Lydia ain't smiled like that in months, not until today. Eleanor's breath caught, her voice barely above a whisper. Then I'm glad I came. He nodded once, as though the thought comforted him more than he could say. Outside, the wind howled through the trees. Inside, the cabin crackled with warmth and the quiet rhythm of two broken hearts learning how to breathe again. And as Eleanor climbed into the small room he'd offered her, his late wife's, she looked around the humble space, the handmade quilt, the simple wooden cross on the wall, and whispered into the darkness. Maybe this is where I was meant to come all along. The wind howled through the Bitterroot Mountains like a creature wounded and wild. By morning, the snow had risen halfway up the cabin walls, and the world outside had disappeared beneath a sheet of white. Eleanor woke to the faint creak of timbers and the smell of coffee drifting through the door. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped out of the small bedroom, blinking into the soft glow of the firelight. Caleb stood by the stove, pouring coffee into 2 tin cups. His broad back was turned toward her, the firelight glancing off his shoulders. The man seemed carved from the same rough wood as the cabin itself, silent, solid, steady. He glanced over his shoulder when she appeared. Mornin', Miss Grace. Didn't mean to wake you. Her voice was still husky with sleep. You didn't? I can't remember the last time I woke up warm. He handed her the steaming cup. Ain't much, but it'll thaw the chill. Their fingers brushed, just briefly, and both of them looked away, pretending not to notice. Outside, the storm raged. Snow lashed against the window panes. Somewhere in the distance, a pine cracked and fell. Eleanor stood near the window, watching the storm swirl in a white fury. How long do the snows last up here? Sometimes a week, Caleb said, tightening a log in the hearth. Sometimes near a month. The mountains decide when they're done with you. She turned toward him, eyebrows lifting. Then we're trapped. He met her gaze, half smiling. Seems that way. The thought should have frightened her, trapped with a stranger and his daughter in a remote cabin, but it didn't. There was something safe about this place, something kind in the silence between them. The day passed slowly. Eleanor mended a tear in Lydia's cloak, humming softly while the child played with a hand-carved horse near the fire. Caleb busied himself splitting logs out back, his axe thudding rhythmically against the chopping block. When he came in, shaking snow from his coat, he paused in the doorway. Eleanor had loosened her hair, and it fell in waves of chestnut and silver down her back. She looked younger somehow, though he knew she wasn't, not young but something better, steady, graceful, alive. He quickly averted his gaze, guilt washing over him for noticing. Eleanor caught him anyway, and for a heartbeat, their eyes met, two lonely souls, both startled by the spark of warmth that passed between them. As evening came, the storm worsened. The cabin moaned under the weight of snow. The fire burned low, and Lydia crawled into Eleanor's lap, eyes heavy with sleep. Eleanor sang softly, a lullaby from her childhood, the kind sung in kitchens by women who waited for men who never came home. Her voice was low, rough in places, but it wrapped the room in a strange kind of peace. Caleb leaned against the wall, arms crossed, listening. He hadn't heard singing in this house since his wife passed. He hadn't realized how empty silence could be until it was broken. When the song ended, Lydia was asleep. Eleanor gently carried her to her bed, tucking her beneath the quilt. Caleb stirred the fire, then looked toward the window. Snow pressed against the glass like a frozen tide. "Looks like we're in for a long one," he said. Eleanor drew her shawl tighter. "You've weathered storms before." He nodded. "Not like this." Then quieter, "Not with company." She smiled faintly. "And I've never had a mountain man for company before." That made him chuckle, a deep rumbling sound that surprised them both. The cabin seemed warmer for it. Night deepened. The blizzard shrieked outside, tearing at the chimney, shaking the shutters. Eleanor set a pot of stew to simmer, her movements sure and gentle, like she'd always belonged here. When she turned, Caleb was standing at the door, peering out through a crack. Snowflakes swirled through the small gap, clinging to his hair and beard. "Come away from there," she urged softly. "You'll freeze." He didn't move. "Just check in the horses." Eleanor crossed the room and laid a hand on his arm, a small, unthinking gesture. The warmth of her touch burned through his sleeve. "Caleb," she said quietly, "you can't fight the storm. Let it pass." He looked down at her, really looked, and something in his face softened. The guardedness fell away, leaving only exhaustion and sorrow. "You don't know what I've lost, Miss Grace." Her eyes met his steadily. "You don't know what I have either." The words lingered in the air like embers. Neither spoke after that. Later, as the cabin settled into the quiet of midnight, Caleb sat alone by the fire. Outside, the snowstorm screamed against the mountains, but inside, the only sound was the crackle of wood and the soft rhythm of two steady breaths, his and Eleanor's. She had fallen asleep in the chair by the hearth, her shawl slipping from her shoulders, a lock of hair falling across her cheek. He rose quietly, lifted the shawl, and tucked it gently around her. His rough hand hesitated, then brushed that stray curl back from her face. She stirred slightly, whispering something in her sleep, a name maybe or a prayer, before sinking back into dreams. Caleb lingered there for a moment, the firelight flickering across his scarred features. And in that flicker, brief, fragile, he realized something he hadn't dared admit since his wife's death. The storm outside didn't scare him. The one brewing inside him did. Outside, the wind began to die. Inside, warmth spread through the cabin like dawn waiting just beyond the snow. And as Caleb sat there watching her sleep, he whispered, almost to himself, "Maybe the mountains don't take everything after all." The storm finally broke 2 days later. When dawn came, it arrived quietly, a pale light washing over the valley, turning every tree branch into glass. The snow lay deep and untouched, glittering under the first sunlight they'd seen in days. Eleanor stood on the porch, breathing in the sharp air. For the first time in years she felt still. The world wasn't rushing past her. There was no train to catch, no letter to wait for, no empty room to return to. Just the mountains, vast, patient, eternal. Behind her, the cabin door creaked open. Caleb stepped out, buttoning his coat. His breath came in clouds, and his hair was damp from washing, streaks of silver catching the morning light. "Snow's packed thick," he said. "Won't be any travelin' for a while." Eleanor smiled faintly. "Then we'll just have to make the best of being trapped." He gave a low chuckle, eyes softening. "Ain't the worst company I've ever had." For a moment she met his gaze, that unguarded honesty between two people who had run out of reasons to pretend. Something unspoken passed through the air like warmth through cold hands. That day, life inside the cabin shifted quietly into rhythm. Eleanor baked bread from the stores of flour and salt Caleb kept in barrels. She patched his torn shirt by the fire, while Lydia sat on the rug, humming to her rag doll. Caleb worked outside, digging paths through the snow, splitting logs, checking on the horses. Every so often, through the window, Eleanor would see him look toward the cabin, and catch herself wondering if he looked for her. That evening when he came in, he found the table set, a pot of stew steaming, and Lydia laughing at something Eleanor had said. He stopped in the doorway, hand still on the latch. It had been so long since laughter filled these walls. Eleanor noticed him. "You're just in time," she said softly. "We were about to start without you." He smiled, a real smile, and stepped inside. Later that night, after Lydia had fallen asleep, they sat together by the fire. The quiet between them was gentle now, not strained. Caleb poured 2 small cups of coffee, handing her one. "You handle yourself well up here," he said. "Most women would have lost their wits snowed in this long." She smiled faintly. "Most women haven't spent half their lives waiting for someone who never came." He frowned. "You're intended?" She nodded, eyes on the fire. "He wrote me for months. Said he wanted a partner, someone with faith and good sense. I suppose I believed him too easily. But when I told him my age, he stopped answering. Caleb's jaw tightened. Fool. Eleanor gave a small, sad laugh. That's kind of you to say. But truth be told, I think he just wanted someone young enough to start again. I'm past that. Caleb stared at her, brow furrowed. Past what? Past being chosen, she said simply. The fire popped between them. The words hung heavy in the air. Caleb leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I don't reckon a woman like you ever stops being worth choosinda. She looked up, startled by the quiet conviction in his tone. You don't even know me. I know enough, he said. You're strong. Kind. My little girl hasn't smiled like that since her mama died. You gave her that. That's more than most. Eleanor felt something rise in her throat, warmth or sorrow she couldn't tell. She turned her face slightly, afraid he'd see the tears in her eyes. You must have loved your wife very much, she said softly. Caleb's expression shifted. He stared into the fire for a long time before answering. I did. Still do, I guess. But love ain't meant to chain the living to the dead. She'd have wanted me to keep going. Eleanor nodded, her voice low. Then maybe that's why I was sent here. Not to be chosen, but to remind someone they still can be. Caleb's eyes met hers, steady, searching. For a moment, the room felt smaller, warmer, as if even the fire had leaned closer to listen. Outside, the wind sighed through the pines like a hymn. Inside, neither of them spoke again. They didn't need to. The next morning, the snow began to melt, slowly, reluctantly, but the thaw wasn't just outside. It was in their hearts. Eleanor and Caleb worked side by side, clearing paths, gathering wood, feeding the animals. Lydia trailed behind, giggling, her mittened hands tossing snow into the air. That night, after supper, Eleanor told the child a story by the fire, about a dove who had lost her way in a storm but found her nest again in the unlikeliest place. Caleb watched from the shadows, his eyes softer than she'd ever seen. And when the story ended, Lydia leaned against Eleanor's arm and said sleepily, Papa, can she stay forever? Eleanor froze. Caleb's gaze flicked toward her, the question between them too dangerous to touch. He cleared his throat. We'll see, Pumpkin. We'll see. The girl smiled, already half asleep. When Caleb carried her to bed, Eleanor sat alone by the fire. Her heart beat heavy in her chest. Forever. She hadn't dared think of such a word in years. But even as warmth filled the cabin, fate was riding closer, dark and angry. Somewhere down in Silver Creek, a man named Silas Boone was asking questions. About a woman who'd come in on the winter train. A bride who'd been promised to him, and was now living with another man. He wasn't done with Eleanor Grace. And when he reached the mountains, love would be tested against pride, jealousy, and the ghosts of the past. The thaw came with mud and noise. Snow melted off the eaves in slow drips, turning the yard to slush. The air smelled of pine sap and wet earth, and somewhere beneath it, the quiet hum of change. Eleanor felt it. Every time Caleb's hand brushed hers at the table. Every time Lydia fell asleep curled in her lap, murmuring, Mama? But peace, like spring, never lasts long in the mountains. That morning, Caleb saddled his horse to ride into town for supplies. You sure you'll be all right? He asked, tugging on his gloves. Eleanor smiled. I think I can manage a day without you, Mr. Holt. He grinned, tipping his hat. Didn't say I could manage a day without you. She flushed, turning away before he could see the small, foolish smile pulling at her lips. Hours passed quietly. Eleanor cleaned, tended the fire, and mended Lydia's small dress. The house was peaceful until the knock came. 3 heavy raps. Sure. Demanding. She froze. Lydia looked up from her doll, eyes wide. Eleanor wiped her hands on her apron and went to the door. When she opened it, the cold rushed in, and with it, a face she never thought she'd see again. Eleanor. The voice was rough, familiar in a way that twisted her stomach. Silas, she breathed. He stood there, coat dusted with melting snow, a travel bag slung over one shoulder. His eyes, cold, pale gray, raked over her from head to toe. So it's true, he said. You're here. Living in a stranger's house. Eleanor's throat tightened. You have no right. No right, he snapped. I sent for you. I paid your passage, wrote letters for months. And when you didn't arrive, I looked a fool before half the county. She stepped back, holding the door as a barrier between them. You stopped writing to me. You said nothing after I told you my age. He sneered. I didn't think I needed to say more. A man doesn't want to marry a woman past her best years. The words hit like a slap. Still she lifted her chin. Then why are you here? Because, he said coldly, folk in Silver Creek are talking. Saying you ran off to live with the mountain hermit. I don't take kindly to being made a fool. You're coming back with me, before everyone thinks you've lost your morals. Before she could answer, Lydia appeared behind her, clutching Eleanor's skirt. Papa's not home, the little girl said softly. Silas's gaze snapped to her. His eyes narrowed. Papa? Eleanor moved quickly, blocking his view. Silas, leave. Now. But Silas stepped forward, his boots scraping the floorboards. You've gone and made a mess of things, woman. You think Holt's gonna marry you? He's got nothing but a cabin and a child. You're making a fool of yourself. Eleanor's hand trembled on the doorframe, but her voice came steady. I'd rather be a fool for kindness than a queen for cruelty. He laughed, a short, cruel sound. You've changed, Eleanor. Used to be meek. Guess the wilderness toughened you. It taught me what real strength looks like. Behind them, the sound of hoofbeats split the air. Caleb rode in fast, snow and mud flying from his horse's hooves. When he saw Silas at the door, his face darkened like a storm rolling in. He dismounted in one motion, boots hitting the ground heavy. Who are you? Silas turned, squaring his shoulders. Silas Boone. The man she was supposed to marry. Caleb's eyes flicked to Eleanor, confusion, then anger, then something softer. Is that true? Eleanor swallowed hard. It was. But I never belonged to him, Caleb. He stopped writing long before I left. Silas stepped closer. She was mine. And now she's living with you, the whole town's talking about it. Caleb's hand went to his belt, not for the gun but for the knife sheath there. He didn't draw it, but the motion was enough. You best watch your tongue, Boone. This woman's under my roof. My care. She's under no one's. Eleanor cut in sharply, stepping between them. Not yours, not his. I don't belong to any man. The silence that followed was so deep, even the fire seemed to still. Lydia whimpered softly. Mama? All three adults froze. Silas turned, eyes narrowing. What did she call you? Eleanor's lips parted, but before she could answer, Lydia spoke again, louder this time, her little voice trembling. She is my mama. Papa said God sent her to us. Caleb's breath caught. He hadn't meant for Lydia to say it aloud. Not yet, not like this. Silas's face twisted. You've gone and played house, haven't you? Pretending to be wife and mother up here in the hills. Eleanor's heart pounded. That's enough, Silas. But he wasn't done. You think this man will keep you? When the gossip reaches town, he'll toss you out like. He never finished. Caleb's fist hit him square in the jaw. Silas fell back into the snow, spitting blood. Caleb loomed over him, eyes blazing. You don't speak to her like that. Not in my hearing. For a long second, Silas just stared up, fury, humiliation, and shock twisting through his face. Then he scrambled to his feet, glaring at Eleanor. This isn't over, he hissed. You'll regret this. He mounted his horse and rode off, leaving a trail of churned snow and silence in his wake. Caleb stood there, chest heaving, fists still tight. Eleanor approached slowly. You shouldn't have done that, she whispered. He had it coming, Caleb said, still staring after the man. She shook her head, tears gathering. Now he'll spread worse rumors. Let him talk, Caleb said. I don't give a damn what they think. She met his gaze, saw the fierce light in his eyes, the protectiveness that had already gone too deep to be simple kindness. You'll care, she whispered. When they say I'm too old for you. That I trapped you. That I came here to take your wife's place. He reached out, hand rough, warm against her cheek. They can say what they want, he murmured. But I know the truth. You didn't take anyone's place. You made one of your own. Her breath caught. Lydia peeked from behind the door, sleepy-eyed and trembling. Mama? Eleanor turned, kneeling down. It's all right, sweet one. Everything's all right. As she hugged the little girl close, Caleb stood behind them, the man who'd once sworn he'd never love again, looking at the woman who'd taught his heart how to thaw. But down the mountain, Silas Boone was already spreading his poison. And when he returned, it wouldn't just be with words. It would be with a warrant. 3 days after Silas rode away, the snow began to fall again, soft and fine like ash from heaven. But peace did not return with it. Eleanor could feel it in the air, a strange heaviness that hung between each quiet moment. Caleb was more watchful now, often staring down the mountain road, jaw set. Even Lydia, bright as she was, had stopped singing her morning songs. Something was coming. That afternoon, as the fire crackled low, a hard knock rattled the cabin door. Caleb was already halfway to it, hand on his belt. When he opened it, 3 men stood outside, 2 deputies and a man in a fine brown coat. The one in the coat stepped forward, holding up a paper sealed with the county's mark. "Caleb Holt," he said, voice clipped. "We've got a warrant." Eleanor froze. Caleb's eyes narrowed. "A warrant for what?" "For harboring a woman under false pretenses. Name's Eleanor Grace, accused of defrauding a marriage contract." The words cut through the air like a whip. Eleanor's hand went to her chest. "That's not true." The man, a marshal by the look of him, gave her a long, measured glance. "Silas Boone filed complaint. Claims you took money and never fulfilled your agreement to wed." Caleb stepped in front of her. "She didn't take a thing from him. He abandoned her." "Then she can tell her story to the judge," the marshal said coldly. "We're taking her in." Lydia began to cry. "No. Don't take my mama." The deputies shifted awkwardly, glancing at one another. Eleanor's knees trembled, but her voice stayed calm. "Please don't frighten the child. I'll go willingly." Caleb turned sharply. "No, you won't." She looked up at him, his eyes fierce, storm-dark. "Caleb." "I said no." His voice was low, dangerous. "This is my land. No one takes what's under my roof unless I let him." The marshal sighed. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Holt. The woman comes with us, or you'll be charged with obstruction." Caleb's fist clenched. For a moment, it looked as though he might fight all 3 right there in the snow. Then Eleanor touched his arm, light, steady. "Please," she whispered. "Don't. For Lydia's sake." He turned to her, eyes searching hers. And what he saw there, courage not fear, made his heart ache. "All right," he said finally, voice rough. "But I'm comin' with you." The ride down the mountain was silent except for the creak of leather and the crunch of hooves through snow. Lydia clung to Eleanor's shawl, refusing to be left behind. By the time they reached Silver Creek, the sun had dipped low, painting the town gold and gray. And as they rode in, heads turned. People whispered. "There she is, the runaway bride." "That's her, the old one the hermit took in." Eleanor kept her gaze straight ahead, chin lifted. Every step of the horse was another heartbeat of shame, but she would not break. "Not here." The marshal led them to the small courthouse by the church. Silas Boone was already there, polished, smug, pretending sorrow. "Well," he said smoothly, "I never wanted it to come to this." Caleb's hand shot out, grabbing his collar. "You lying snake." "Caleb." Eleanor's voice cut through the air. "Stop." She turned to the marshal. "I'll speak my piece." Inside the room was small and cold. The judge sat behind a desk, spectacles perched on his nose. "Miss Eleanor Grace," he said, looking over the papers. "You're accused of accepting money and goods for a marriage arrangement you never honored." "I honored everything I was given," she said clearly. "A train ticket, a promise, a letter." He stopped writing when he learned my age. The judge raised a brow. "You were under no binding contract then?" Silas interrupted. "Your Honor, I sent for her. That makes her my betrothed." "No, sir," Eleanor said, her voice calm but sharp. "You sent for an image of a woman you invented. And when the truth came, you turned your back. That is not love. That is vanity." A murmur swept through the room. The judge looked from Silas to Eleanor. "Do you have proof she took anything beyond passage fare?" Silas hesitated. I paid for her." Caleb stepped forward. "And I paid it back. Every cent, got the receipt right here." He slapped a folded note on the desk, Silas's own handwriting acknowledging repayment. The judge frowned. "Then this matter's closed." Silas went pale. "But—" "Enough," the judge said, gavel striking wood. "You brought shame on yourself, Boone. Not on this woman." When they stepped outside, the evening light spilled over the street. Townsfolk watched from porches, whispering again, but this time it sounded different. Eleanor's knees gave way slightly and Caleb caught her arm. "Easy now." Her voice broke. "It's over." He looked at her, really looked, and something deep inside him shifted. "No, Ellie. It's just beginning." Lydia ran up, throwing her arms around Eleanor's waist. "Mama, we can go home now?" Eleanor froze, tears welling. Caleb knelt beside the girl, smiling faintly. "Yeah, pumpkin. We're all going home." He looked up at Eleanor. "If you'll still have us." Her heart swelled, with fear, with gratitude, with something that felt dangerously like love. "I never had a home of my own," she whispered. "But with you and her, I think I've found it." Caleb's hand found hers, rough and warm. "Then let's go home, Mrs. Holt." She blinked, breath catching. "Mrs. Holt." He smiled, that quiet, sure kind of smile that leaves no room for doubt. We'll see what the preacher says about that come spring. But even as they rode back into the mountain's shadow, the clouds were gathering again. Because love born of hardship never comes without its test. And before spring came, Caleb would have to fight not just for Eleanor's heart, but for his very life. Winter loosened her grip on the mountains at last. The snow that had blanketed the valley for months gave way to green shoots and trickling streams. The pine branches that once bent beneath ice now lifted toward the sun, whispering of renewal. And in that quiet cabin tucked between ridges and rivers, new life stirred too. Eleanor woke early each morning to the scent of coffee and wildflowers. Caleb always rose before dawn to chop wood, his rhythmic axe echoing through the valley like a heartbeat. Lydia would pad sleepily into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes and murmuring, "Mama, he's out there again." Every time Eleanor heard that word, "Mama," her chest filled until she thought her heart might burst. One morning as she stood on the porch watching Caleb work, she caught herself smiling, not the polite, careful smile she once wore, but the unguarded kind that comes when the soul finally rests. Caleb looked up, noticing her at the doorway. "You'll catch cold," he said, setting down the axe. She laughed softly. "It's spring, Caleb." He crossed the yard, boots sinking in soft earth, and stopped just short of her. The smell of pine and wood smoke clung to him. "Feels strange, don't it?" he murmured. "To see green again." "Strange," she said, "but good." They stood there for a moment, just breathing in the new season, the kind that only comes after long winters of loss. Caleb turned toward her, eyes gentle. "I meant what I said, Eleanor. When the thaw came. About making you a Holt." She met his gaze, her voice trembling slightly. "You don't have to." He shook his head. "It ain't about have to. It's about want to. You and Lydia, you're my family whether paper says so or not. But I want it said. Out loud. Before God and every man who ever doubted." Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the soft gold of morning light. "Then I reckon," she whispered, "we best start making plans." A month later. The valley bloomed. Wildflowers painted the fields, yellows, blues and soft purples climbing toward the peaks. The cabin, once lonely, was alive with neighbors who'd come to celebrate. Word had spread, not of shame but of grace. The woman once scorned as too old for marriage, had become the heart of a mountain home, beloved by a child and cherished by the man who once swore he'd never love again. Eleanor stood in the clearing behind the cabin, her hair braided with tiny sprigs of lavender. The dress she wore wasn't new, just her old gray one mended at the hem, but Lydia had tucked a daisy behind her ear and somehow that made it perfect. Caleb waited near the edge of the woods, hat in hand, his face lit with something steadier than joy, reverence. As she walked toward him, Lydia skipped ahead, carrying a small bunch of wildflowers in her tiny hands. She turned, grinning wide. "Mama, hurry?" Eleanor laughed, following the little girl's steps. When she reached Caleb, the preacher smiled and said simply, "We stand today to bless what's already been made whole." Caleb took Eleanor's hands, rough palms meeting soft ones, both marked by work and loss and healing. "I never thought I'd love again," he said quietly. "But you came into this place and mended more than a broken home. You mended me." Eleanor's eyes shimmered. "I thought love had passed me by. That no one wanted a woman past her youth. But then your little girl pointed at me and said, 'That's my mama.'" Her voice caught. "And for the first time, I believed maybe God wasn't done writing my story." Lydia giggled, running between them, clutching both their hands. "You are my mama," she said proudly, looking up at the preacher. "You can marry her now, Papa." The crowd chuckled softly, and even Caleb had to laugh, his deep voice rumbling like distant thunder. "With your permission, sweetheart," he said, kneeling to Lydia's height, "I'd sure like to." Lydia nodded solemnly, eyes wide with excitement. "You have it." The vows were simple. True. Spoken not from ceremony, but from the marrow of lives rebuilt. When Caleb slipped the small silver band onto Eleanor's finger, a ring that once belonged to his late wife, now carrying new meaning, she looked at him with a peace she'd never known. And when the preacher said, "You may kiss your bride," the mountains seemed to echo it, wind through the pines, rivers singing, birds taking flight. Caleb kissed her gently, reverently, as Lydia squealed with joy and threw her wildflowers into the air. That night, the cabin glowed warm under the stars. Music and laughter drifted through open windows. Eleanor sat by the hearth with Lydia asleep in her lap, watching Caleb across the room, smiling, talking with the neighbors. The firelight caught the silver in his hair and the soft curve of his smile. He looked at her then across the room, and in that glance she saw everything: promise, protection, peace. The kind of love that doesn't come from youth or beauty, but from choosing each other every day. Outside, spring wrapped the mountain in color and sound. And for the first time Eleanor Grace Holt, once unwanted, once unseen, felt wholly, entirely home. She closed her eyes and whispered a prayer of thanks. Not for the wedding. Not even for love. But for the little girl who once pointed through a crowd and said the words that changed everything. That's her, that's my mama.